Guys, I'm going back to therapy. OMG. Hello internet, if you're new here, I'm Shawnee. Welcome back to my channel. If you're not new, I am back with another mental health related video. It has been forever since I've made a video on this topic. So many of you actually found my channel through my mental health related videos. I have a series on my channel called Social Anxiety Confessions, where I talk all about my history and struggles with social anxiety growing up, specifically selective mutism. And I also have a series called Eating Disorder Confessions, where I've talked about my struggles with that. So in this video, I'm going to talk about why I'm going back to therapy, things I'm hoping to work on in therapy, things I looked for in a therapist, and what it's like doing therapy and trying to find a therapist during a pandemic. But before we jump into any of those things, let me tell you a little bit about my history with therapy. First, I want to say a little bit of a trigger warning for this video because I'm going to mention topics that might be triggering to some people depending on the things that you struggle with. I don't think I'm really going to be talking too much about depression in this video, but I will mention it briefly. And I'm not going to go into any specific details about eating disorders either, but sometimes people get triggered by just hearing vague things about those topics, so I wanted to throw that out there. Growing up, I had a form of social anxiety called selective mutism. I was first diagnosed with selective mutism at age 5. Pretty early on, my parents were having me talk to different mental health professionals, psychiatrists, counselors. I think I was 8 years old when I was first put on Prozac, but from age 5 to around age 23, I struggled with social anxiety. So I had so many therapists growing up because talking whenever I was around anyone other than my immediate family or people I was really comfortable around, people who like broke through my shell basically, whenever I was out around most people in the world, it was really hard for me to talk. As I got older in my teen years and early adulthood, that makes me sound so old. So like high school and then age like 18, 19, like early 20s, I also started struggling with depression and suicidal ideation. So during those years when I was in therapy, I was working on my social anxiety, but I was also working through my depression. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I said goodbye to my most recent therapist, and that was about 6 years ago. I saw her when I was living in Seattle, Washington before moving here. But once I moved away from Seattle, I left that therapist, and then I never ended up connecting with a new one. Not because I didn't need a therapist. I've definitely needed a therapist, more so at certain times than others over the past 6 years. I'm just the kind of person where I don't always get help when I need it. But I am changing that, guys. I've decided that it's time to go back, even though the idea of going back to therapy obviously makes me nervous for different reasons. So let's talk about why I'm going back. As I mentioned, in the past when I've been in therapy, I've always been working through my social anxiety and then my depression. I don't really need to work through those things anymore. At all, actually, which is amazing. At this point in time, I'm not struggling with depression and I'm not struggling with social anxiety. So I'm actually going back to therapy for new reasons this time, and I will share those reasons with you guys. Phobias are kind of called irrational fears because a lot of times they're not necessarily rational. There are definitely rational fears that exist, but some fears that some of us have aren't rational, and like you can recognize that it's not rational, but it can still be terrifying to you. And so I've struggled with a specific phobia since I was pretty young. I just don't want to struggle with it anymore because it affects my life in ways that I just don't want it to affect my life. I try and avoid it. The thing that I'm not going to talk about what the specific phobia is, but I'm just going to talk about it in a general sense. I try and avoid it. I try and avoid situations. I try and avoid like seeing it on the internet, which is hard, and oftentimes I do end up seeing it and then it like triggers me and I start feeling anxious and it gives me nightmares and it just affects my life in all these really negative ways. And for some reason, when the pandemic first started in March and the lockdown started, it just kind of started to affect my life even more. I started having even more nightmares and things like that. My phobia, and working through that with a licensed professional who can help me because it's pretty serious. At least to me, it feels pretty serious. That is one of the big reasons why I want to go to therapy, is to work through this phobia, and I know that I can. You can work through any phobia. Like, it does feel impossible to me, but I already know it's not. I've done some research on the internet. You can work through any phobia with help. So that's the biggest reason. But there are also a few other topics that I'd like to discuss with a therapist and talk about. Some of those other topics are the topic of coming out. Another thing I would like to talk about is, I don't know if you guys have heard of attachment styles and attachment theory. Thanks to a video by one of my new favorite YouTubers, Amy Lee. She made a video all about attachment styles, and I feel like that video really resonated with me in a lot of ways and really opened my eyes to why I've felt certain ways and behaved certain ways and had certain experiences in past relationships and when dating in the past. Just talking that through with a therapist and what my possible attachment style might be, it's definitely something I want to work on. Look into attachment styles. It's really hard for me to explain. I'm not an expert on it, but look it up. It might resonate with you too. I think there are like 4 different attachment styles, and the ideal one is called secure attachment or securely attached, and that's where I would like to get. That's my goal. Lastly, I do have a history of struggling with eating disorders and having a bad relationship with food and negative body image and all of those things. Personally, I don't feel ready to like breach that topic in therapy, but it is a topic that I hope to feel ready to tackle in therapy at some point. You might be thinking, wow, you're being so honest about this. Like, no, I don't want to lie and say I'm ready to try and work through my eating disorder in therapy, because I'm not, and working through your eating disorder takes a lot of courage and it can be really scary, and like, eating disorders are really messed up mental illnesses and mental disorders, and it's really messed up, like the kind of thoughts that you have and the mindset that you have when you struggle with an eating disorder, and that's why it's so hard to overcome. And so many people don't understand, like, people can see your weight loss or weight gain, people can see your eating disorder habits that they might notice you doing, but all of that stuff is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating, or having a negative relationship with food and body image or anything like that. Like, the things people see are just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that happens internally, and there's so much more that we experience that just makes it really hard to not only recover, but to want to recover in the first place. It's hard to explain, but yeah. So now that I've talked about some of the things I'm hoping to work on in therapy, I'm going to talk about what I looked for in a therapist when looking for a therapist. First of all, I procrastinated for months on even trying to start the process of finding a therapist because it was just so daunting to me. I actually filmed footage for this video that I'm not gonna use at all, but like, I filmed footage for this video back in March or April of 2020 when I first had the thought of wanting a therapist. But that's how long I procrastinated for. I don't know about you guys, but my health insurance gives us this huge book. I should bring it in here, but it's this huge book, and it's a database of all of our healthcare providers that we can choose from, and there are pages and pages and pages of like different therapists that we can choose from, and it just felt really daunting to me because I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to look through all these people, I'm gonna have to look into each one, and it was just overwhelming. I didn't end up using that database. I ended up using Psychology Today, but basically the requirements I wanted in a therapist were someone who's covered by my insurance, a woman, a black woman, someone who's black so that they can understand my experience and like different cultural things. They'll just naturally already know, so I won't have to like go that extra length of explaining like certain things to them. And I also really wanted to find a member of the LGBTQ plus community, someone who identifies as queer, so that they can understand that experience as well, so that I can talk about those topics and feel comfortable talking about those topics, and once again not feel like I have to go the extra mile to explain where I'm coming from on certain things, which is why I think it is really important to find a therapist who has certain things in common with you, and you can decide like what those things are that are really important that a therapist has in common with you. But I do think you should sit down if you're going to be looking for a therapist to figure out like, okay, what do I want them to already have in common with me, so I don't have to explain until they just understand naturally where I'm coming from about certain things. But I definitely was looking for those 4 things in a therapist, so I ended up finding someone that fit all of those categories, except she wasn't covered by my insurance, so I was gonna have to pay out of pocket, and I did. I tried a few sessions with her because she fit the other 3 categories, and so I tried teletherapy for the first time. This therapist that I found, she did teletherapy, which means it wasn't over video conference, but it was over the phone. And obviously the reason most therapists aren't doing in-person sessions right now is because of the pandemic. Anyway, so I tried teletherapy. I tried 2 sessions with this therapist. I'll talk a little bit about it. It turned out that this therapist is most likely not going to work out for me. It's not going to be a good fit, and I'm going to have to start the process of looking for a therapist all over again. But as is life, it happens. I want to find someone who feels like the perfect fit and the right fit, and if I'm feeling like there are things that I don't like about this therapist, then I don't think it makes sense for me to stay with her, because someone who's a better fit is most likely out there. I'll quickly talk about the pros and cons of the therapist I found. I know I've talked in the past about how talking on the phone is one of the things that still scares me and makes me anxious, and I pretty much avoid it whenever I don't have to do it. I only do it when I absolutely have to. And so the idea of doing therapy on the phone did make me nervous, and I was not excited about that. This specific therapist that I tried only did it on the phone and not really video conference, so that was one of the cons. I felt like the ratio of her talking to me talking was off. She spent a lot of time talking, which is fine, but it wasn't necessarily like things that were specifically helpful. She did spend kind of a lot of time talking about herself. Like for example, when we would first start our conversation, she would say, "How are you doing?" Which kind of feels like a pleasantry, right? To start any conversation, and I would say, "Good." And then, you know, as a pleasantry, I would say, "How are you doing?" And she would actually go into like in detail how she's doing and like things that are happening in her life. Not necessarily all positive. So basically putting emotional, not emotional baggage, but I don't know how else to say it. Like basically putting emotional baggage on me, and that didn't really feel right to me. I feel like that's not really how therapy is supposed to go. That was something that I was like, I don't know. Other aspects of our sessions, things would come up that felt a little unprofessional on her end. So we would have our sessions over the phone. At one point during one of our sessions, she was literally at a Starbucks drive-thru ordering food. And at another point, she was like talking to someone to accept a delivery of some sort. I'm not really sure. And I'm the kind of person where I give people too much of a chance. There was another red flag that happened on our first session that got rescheduled last minute because of something that was happening in her life, which she went into great detail about. Even though certain aspects of the things she was telling me about what was going on in her life could have been triggering to me. She didn't know me at that point, but it could have been triggering to anyone that's seeking out therapy. So there have been certain red flags. There have been certain things that I haven't liked. So it just kind of had to be about the pros and cons. If I'm in therapy, I want to feel like I can talk and be listened to and be heard in a really thoughtful way. And it almost felt like during our sessions, I was having to like jump in and say things, or like wait a long time to be able to say things, and feel like I had to hurry up and get my thoughts out because she was gonna start talking again, which, as I'm saying it, sounds even worse. Really, that's not how it's supposed to be. A few of the pros with her were, during one of our sessions, I really did find helpful her history with, you know, how she identifies and, you know, her sexuality and her history with relationships and certain types of relationships, and some of the advice she was giving me from her specific experiences over the years. She's a little bit older, but I did find being able to talk to her about those specific topics very, very helpful, and I don't know if I'll be able to find that again. But I've realized that that might be okay, because I just really want someone who is professional, who listens well, who can maybe do video therapy and not phone therapy, and who can really help me with these issues that I want to work through. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums up this video. If you guys are interested in getting a follow-up video from me about, like, you know, as I continue to look for a new therapist, or like as I continue to have different sessions, how all of it's going, what it's like, what the process of finding one is like for me, and just like, if you'd like a follow-up video on this topic, let me know. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, stick around, turn on the notifications bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video. I'll see you guys again very soon. Thanks for watching.